What happens when a man of God goes from flying in private jets to filing for bankruptcy? When the collection plate stops filling up and the IRS comes knocking? Today, we're diving into the shocking stories of 12 black pastors who lost everything almost overnight. Make sure you stick around until the last one, because that story is absolutely wild. 1. Pastor Lamore Whitehead. Pastor Whitehead made headlines in 2022, but not for the reasons most pastors would want. This man was known for his expensive taste. We're talking about over $1 million in jewelry, designer suits, luxury cars, and a lifestyle that would make even some celebrities jealous. He called himself the Bishop of Swagger, and he definitely lived up to that name. But here's where things went completely sideways. In July 2022, during a live-streamed church service, armed robbers walked right into his church and robbed him at gunpoint. They took about $400,000 worth of jewelry right off his body while he was preaching. The whole thing was caught on camera and went viral. Can you imagine? Being robbed while preaching, and the entire world watching it happen online. But that robbery was just the beginning of his problems. The legal troubles started piling up. He was charged with wire fraud, attempted extortion, and making false statements to the FBI. The Fed said he scammed a parishioner out of $90,000 in retirement savings, promising to help her buy a house, but instead spending it on luxury goods for himself. In 2024, he was convicted and sentenced to 9 years in prison. All that bling, all those fancy cars, all that swagger, gone in an instant. His assets were seized, his reputation destroyed, and his ministry collapsed. The man who once boasted about his wealth was now facing nearly a decade behind bars. The community was divided. Some felt betrayed, saying he was never a real man of God, but a con artist in religious clothing. Others felt sad, believing he had a genuine calling but got seduced by materialism and greed. Either way, Pastor Whitehead went from living large to losing everything practically overnight. 2. Pastor Eddie Long. Now, Eddie Long's story is different from the others because his financial collapse was tied directly to scandal and allegations that rocked the religious community. At his peak, Pastor Long was one of the most influential megachurch pastors in America. New Birth had about 25,000 members, and Long lived like royalty. He had $1 million mansion, drove luxury vehicles, wore designer clothes, and even had a 6-figure salary plus benefits that most CEOs would envy. The church was bringing in millions annually, and Eddie Long was at the center of it all. But in 2010, everything changed. Multiple young men came forward accusing Pastor Long of sexual misconduct. These weren't random accusations. These were young men from his own congregation, people he had mentored through his youth ministry. The allegations were serious and detailed, painting a picture that was completely at odds with the image Long had cultivated. The lawsuits started flying. While Long denied the allegations, the church reportedly settled the cases for millions of dollars. We're talking about settlements that some sources estimate to be around $15 million or more. That kind of money has to come from somewhere. The scandal destroyed his reputation. Church attendance dropped dramatically. People stopped giving. Major speaking engagements dried up. Book deals disappeared. The financial empire he had built started crumbling. The church, which had been worth millions, saw its value plummet. Long tried to rebuild his image, but the damage was done. He passed away in 2017 from cancer, but by that time, his financial situation was nowhere near what it once was. The church had to sell property, cut staff, and drastically reduce operations. Some reports suggested that Long himself faced significant financial difficulties in his final years. What's tragic about this story is the ripple effect. It wasn't just Pastor Long who suffered financially. Thousands of church members who had invested their faith, time, and money felt betrayed. Employees lost jobs. Community programs shut down. 3. Pastor Creflo Dollar. Now hold on. Technically, Creflo Dollar hasn't gone completely broke, but he faced a major financial embarrassment that forced him to make some serious changes. Creflo Dollar is one of the most well-known prosperity gospel preachers in America. His whole message has been about faith and financial blessing, the idea that God wants you to be wealthy, and if you have enough faith and give generously to the church, God will multiply it back to you. Dollar lived this message to the fullest. He owned 2 Rolls-Royces, a private jet, multi-million-dollar homes in Atlanta and New York, and lived a lifestyle that made many people question whether a pastor should be that rich. The major turning point came in 2015 when he launched Project G650, asking his members to donate $300 each to help him buy a $65 million Gulfstream G650 private jet. Yes, you heard that right. He wanted his congregation to buy him a $65 million plane. The backlash was immediate and fierce. People across the country, including other religious leaders, criticized him. The negative publicity was so intense that he had to shut down the fundraising campaign. The embarrassment was real, and for the first time, people started questioning his teachings openly. But here's where the financial trouble really kicked in. The IRS and various watchdog groups started looking more closely at his finances. Questions were raised about whether his church was properly maintaining its tax-exempt status. Attendance at his church started declining. Offerings decreased. In 2022, in a shocking turn of events, Creflo Dollar publicly apologized and recanted his prosperity gospel teachings. He admitted he had been wrong about some of his core teachings regarding money and faith. This was huge. Imagine a preacher admitting that his life's work was based on flawed theology. This admission caused even more financial problems. Some longtime supporters left feeling deceived. Others stayed but gave less. His book sales suffered. Speaking engagements became fewer. While he's not on the streets, Pastor Dollar had to dramatically scale back his lifestyle and ministry operations. 4. Bishop Thomas Weeks III. If that name sounds familiar, it's probably because he was married to televangelist Juanita Bynum, and their relationship drama played out on a national stage. Thomas Weeks co-founded Global Destiny Churches and was a successful prosperity preacher in his own right. During his marriage to Juanita Bynum, the couple was religious royalty, doing conferences together, writing books, and bringing in serious money. We're talking millions in annual income from book sales, speaking fees, and church offerings. But in 2007, everything fell apart spectacularly. Weeks was arrested and charged with assaulting Bynum in a hotel parking lot in Atlanta. The incident made national news, and the details were disturbing. The couple divorced, and the fallout was catastrophic. Almost overnight, Weeks lost everything. Speaking invitations disappeared. His church attendance plummeted. Book contracts were canceled. Juanita Bynum's supporters, who were many, wanted nothing to do with him. The financial empire they had built together crumbled. Legal fees from the assault case and the divorce proceedings ate through his savings. He had to sell property. His ministry went from filling large venues to struggling to keep a small church going. Some reports indicated he faced foreclosure on multiple properties and had significant debt. What made it worse was that Weeks tried to rebuild his reputation, but the damage was done. In the age of the internet, that parking lot incident followed him everywhere. Every time he tried to launch something new, the past would resurface. By the mid-2010s, Weeks was essentially starting from scratch financially. The man who once had it all was rebuilding with a tiny fraction of what he once had. He eventually remarried and tried to start fresh, but he never regained the financial status or influence he once enjoyed. 5. Pastor Zachary Timms. This one is particularly heartbreaking because it involves not just financial collapse, but personal demons that led to his untimely death. Zachary Timms was a young, charismatic preacher who built New Destiny into a megachurch with about 8,000 members. He was seen as a rising star in the ministry world, young, energetic, and inspiring. The church was thriving financially with a multi-million-dollar facility and growing influence. But behind the scenes, Timms was struggling. In 2009, he admitted to adultery and substance abuse issues. The revelation was shocking to his congregation. He stepped down temporarily, went to rehab, and then returned to the pulpit. Many people were willing to give him a second chance. However, the financial damage had already begun. During his absence, church attendance and giving dropped significantly. The church had debt from their building expansion, and now they were bringing in less money to service that debt. Financial pressure mounted. Then, in 2011, the unthinkable happened. Timms was found dead in a New York City hotel room. The autopsy revealed drugs in his system. The man who had stood before thousands preaching about transformation and faith had succumbed to the very addiction he thought he had conquered. The aftermath was devastating financially. The church faced an immediate crisis. Without their founding pastor, attendance dropped even further. Leadership disputes arose. Within a few years, New Destiny Christian Center, which had once been worth millions and ministered to thousands, essentially collapsed. The building was sold, the ministry dissolved, and what remained was a shell of what it once was. Timms' personal estate was also in trouble. Legal battles over his assets arose. There were debts to settle. What should have been a legacy of faith and inspiration turned into a cautionary tale about unresolved personal issues. 6. Pastor Jamal Bryant. Now, Bryant hasn't gone completely broke, but he's faced significant financial challenges that nearly destroyed his ministry. Jamal Bryant started Empowerment Temple in Baltimore and quickly became one of the most popular young pastors in America. He was known for his dynamic preaching style, his activism, and his large social media following. The church grew rapidly and money was flowing in. But Bryant's personal life became his Achilles heel. He admitted to having multiple affairs and fathering children outside his marriage. His divorce from his wife, who was also a gospel singer, was messy and public. The scandals kept coming. More allegations, more women, more drama. Each scandal brought financial consequences. Church members left, donations decreased, legal fees from various paternity suits, and his divorce piled up. Child support payments for multiple children became a significant drain on his income. At one point, there were reports of him being behind on child support and facing legal action. The Empowerment Temple in Baltimore started struggling financially. There were reports of unpaid taxes and debt. The congregation that once numbered in the thousands dwindled. Eventually, Bryant left Baltimore and took over New Birth in Atlanta after Eddie Long's death. But even at New Birth, he faced financial challenges. The church was already dealing with debt and declining attendance from the Long-era scandals. Bryant had to drastically cut costs, sell property, and rebuild. Some months, according to insiders, they struggled to make payroll. Bryant has been working to turn things around, focusing on his preaching and staying out of scandal. But the financial hole he dug for himself through poor personal choices took years to climb out of, and the full recovery is still ongoing. The takeaway? Your personal indiscretions have public financial consequences, especially when you're a leader. Every scandal costs money in legal fees, lost income, and damaged reputation. We're only halfway through this list, and already we've seen millions of dollars lost. But the next few stories, they're even more shocking than what we've already covered. 7. Carlton Pearson. Carlton Pearson was a superstar in the Pentecostal world. His Higher Dimensions Family Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma, had about 5,000 members at its peak. He was bringing in millions annually, had a thriving television ministry, produced gospel albums, and was friends with Oral Roberts himself. Pearson was living very comfortably. But in the early 2000s, Pearson had what he called a revelation. He began preaching a doctrine called gospel of inclusion, essentially saying that everyone is already saved and hell doesn't exist in the way traditional Christianity teaches. This was radical and completely opposed to what he had preached for decades. The reaction was swift and brutal. The Joint College of African American Pentecostal Bishops declared him a heretic. Other pastors denounced him. His church members began leaving in droves. Within a few years, his 5,000-member church dwindled to less than 300 people. The financial collapse was immediate. His television program was canceled. Conference invitations evaporated. Book deals dried up. His church building, which had once held thousands, was now mostly empty, but still had the same bills. They couldn't afford to maintain it, and eventually lost the building. Pearson went from making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to struggling to pay basic bills. He had to sell his home. His lifestyle changed dramatically. He eventually moved to Chicago and joined a liberal church where his new theology was accepted, but he was no longer a pastor with his own thriving ministry. In interviews, Pearson has been remarkably honest about the financial devastation. He lost nearly everything: his church, his income, his reputation in the religious community, and most of his wealth. But he maintains he had to speak his truth regardless of the cost. Michael Pitts. Michael Pitts built Cornerstone into a mega church with thousands of members and significant influence. The church had multiple campuses, a large staff, and brought in millions in annual revenue. Pitts was living well: nice home, nice cars, and a salary that reflected his position as head of a mega church. In 2006, everything changed. A man accused Pitts of propositioning him for intimacy. Pitts denied the allegations, but the accusation alone was enough to create chaos. The man was eventually indicted for lying, but the damage to Pitts' reputation and church was already done. The legal battle was expensive. Defending himself cost hundreds of thousands of dollars in attorney fees. But worse than the legal costs was the exodus of church members. Even though Pitts was ultimately vindicated when his accuser was convicted of perjury and extortion, many people had already left the church. Church income dropped by millions. They had to lay off staff, close campuses, and scale back programming. The church went from being one of the fastest growing in the region to fighting for survival. Pitt's personal finances took a major hit as well: legal fees, reduced salary due to reduced church income, and the stress of it all. It took Cornerstone years to rebuild financially. They eventually regained some stability, but they never reached the same heights they had before the accusations. The financial setback was enormous, and Pitts himself admits they lost nearly a decade of growth and momentum. False accusations can be just as financially devastating as true ones. In the court of public opinion, sometimes you're guilty until proven innocent, and by the time you prove your innocence, the financial damage is already catastrophic. 9. Pastor Willie Wilson. Wilson's financial troubles are particularly interesting because they involve both personal poor decisions and trying to do good that went bad. Willie Wilson was known as a generous pastor who genuinely wanted to help his community. He became wealthy not just from his church, but from various business ventures. At his peak, he was worth millions and lived very comfortably. Wilson ran for mayor of D.C. multiple times, spending millions of his own money on campaigns. While this was his choice, it significantly depleted his resources. But what really caused his financial problems was a combination of bad business deals and tax issues. Wilson invested heavily in several business ventures that failed. We're talking about millions lost in real estate deals that went south and business partnerships that collapsed. He also faced serious IRS problems, with reports of owing millions in back taxes. The tax liens and failed businesses forced him to sell assets and drastically change his lifestyle. While his church remained stable, his personal finances were in shambles for several years. He had to negotiate payment plans with the IRS and slowly rebuild his financial standing. What's notable about Wilson is that he was open about his struggles, using them as teaching moments for his congregation about financial stewardship and the dangers of overextending yourself. 10. Pastor Darrell Scott. Pastor Darrell Scott was doing really well for himself. His church was growing, people loved his preaching style, and the money was coming in steadily. He had built a solid reputation in Cleveland and was known as a passionate preacher who genuinely cared about his community. Life was good, and the church was financially stable with thousands of members supporting the ministry. But then Scott decided to get heavily involved in politics. He became one of the most vocal black pastors supporting Donald Trump during the 2016 election and beyond. Now, I'm not here to talk about politics, but here's what happened financially. His decision split his congregation right down the middle. Some people supported his political stance, but many others were angry and felt betrayed. When your church members are fighting about politics, guess what happens? They stop coming to church. And when they stop coming to church, they stop putting money in the offering plate. It's that simple. Scott's church income started dropping fast. We're talking about losing hundreds of thousands of dollars in annual revenue because people were walking out the door. But the political controversy was just the beginning of his financial nightmare. Scott faced multiple lawsuits related to business dealings and how church money was being handled. There were serious allegations about financial mismanagement, though Scott denied any wrongdoing. But whether the allegations were true or not didn't matter at that point. The legal fees were piling up like crazy. Defending yourself in court is expensive, people. We're talking about lawyers charging hundreds of dollars per hour, and these cases dragged on for months. Scott was spending money he didn't have on legal defense, while his church income was dropping because of the political controversy. It was like getting hit with a double punch. Things got so bad that there were reports of the church building facing foreclosure. Can you imagine? A megachurch that once thrived was now in danger of losing its actual building because it couldn't pay the mortgage and other debts. Staff had to be let go. Programs were cut. The ministry that once had big dreams and big budgets was now just trying to survive month to month. Scott has been working hard to turn things around and stabilize the situation, but the damage was severe. The financial impact of mixing politics with ministry, combined with expensive legal battles, nearly destroyed everything he had built. His story is a perfect example of how quickly things can fall apart when controversy and legal troubles hit at the same time. If you're still watching right now, drop a comment below and tell us which story has shocked you the most so far. Also, if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we drop content like this that you won't find anywhere else. 11. Bishop Paul S. Morton. Bishop Paul S. Morton was a giant in the black church community. He founded the Full Gospel Baptist Church Fellowship, which brought together thousands of churches across the country. He was a gifted preacher, an incredible gospel singer with multiple albums, and an author of successful books. This man had multiple streams of income flowing in: church salary, music royalties, book sales, speaking fees from conferences and events. We're talking about a man who was making serious money and living very comfortably. Morton was respected everywhere he went. He could charge top dollar for speaking, engagements, and people were happy to pay it because his preaching was powerful and his music touched souls. He had built a financial empire through decades of hard work and genuine ministry. Everything seemed secure. But then life happened in a way nobody expected. Morton went through a difficult and expensive divorce. Now, divorces are costly for anyone. But when you're a high-profile pastor with assets and income streams, the financial settlement can be massive. Legal fees alone can run into hundreds of thousands of dollars. Then there's the actual divorce settlement, dividing property, assets, and sometimes ongoing financial obligations. Morton's divorce ate through a huge chunk of his savings and assets. Just when you think things couldn't get worse, his health started failing. Morton developed serious health problems that required expensive medical treatment. Even with insurance, medical bills can be crushing, especially when you need specialized care or ongoing treatment. His health issues forced him to slow down his active ministry schedule significantly. Here's where the financial trouble really intensified. As a preacher, your income is directly tied to your ability to actively minister. When Morton had to reduce his speaking engagements because of health problems, that income stream dried up. Conference organizers want speakers who can travel and perform at their best. When you're dealing with health issues, those invitations stop coming. His music career also slowed down because producing albums and touring require energy and health that he no longer had. Book sales depend on you being out there promoting, doing interviews, and staying relevant. When you're not in the public eye as much, sales drop. All of his income streams were connected to his active participation, and when his health forced him to step back, the money stopped flowing. On top of all this, some business ventures he had invested in failed during this same period. It was like everything that could go wrong financially went wrong at once. Morton went from being a wealthy, successful bishop to facing real financial pressure and struggling to pay bills. The medical expenses kept coming. The reduced income meant he had to make difficult choices. He had to sell some assets. His lifestyle changed dramatically. This wasn't about poor choices or scandal. This was about how quickly your financial situation can collapse when health fails and life circumstances change. Morton eventually remarried and has been slowly rebuilding his finances, but there was a genuine period where he faced serious financial hardship. His story is a reminder that even the most successful pastors need proper financial planning, emergency funds, and insurance, because life can change in an instant. 12. Bishop John Richard Bryant. And finally, at number 1, we have Bishop John Richard Bryant, and this story is perhaps the most shocking because it involves someone who did everything right, but still faced financial devastation in his later years. Bishop John Richard Bryant wasn't just any pastor. He was religious royalty. He served as a senior bishop in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, one of the oldest and most respected black denominations in America. He held the highest positions in the church, traveled internationally representing the denomination, and was considered one of the most important religious leaders in the black community. He's also the father of Jamal Bryant, who we talked about earlier. For someone at Bishop Bryant's level, financial security was just assumed. He had spent over 50 years in ministry, working his way up through the ranks, serving faithfully, and building a reputation as a man of integrity and wisdom. Everyone thought his retirement would be comfortable and secure. He had dedicated his entire life to the church, and surely the church would take care of him in his golden years, right? Wrong. In his later years, the shocking truth came out. Bishop Bryant was facing serious financial struggles. This wasn't because of scandal, poor choices, or lavish living. This was about a systemic problem in how many black churches handle retirement and financial security for their leaders. Here's what happened. Bishop Bryant discovered that the church pension and retirement systems weren't as solid as everyone thought. The AME Church, like many denominations, has pension funds that are supposed to take care of retired pastors and bishops. But these funds were underfunded, poorly managed, or just insufficient for the actual needs of retired leaders. The benefits he was counting on weren't enough to maintain even a modest lifestyle. On top of the pension problems, Bryant had investment losses. Like many people, he had invested money expecting it to grow for retirement. But bad investment advice, market downturns, and poor returns meant those investments didn't pan out the way he hoped. Money, he thought, would support him in retirement, but simply wasn't there. Then there's the issue of lifestyle maintenance. When you've been a bishop at the highest level, there are certain expectations. You're expected to dress a certain way, live in a certain type of home, and maintain a certain appearance. These expectations don't disappear when you retire, but your income sure does. Bishop Bryant found himself trying to maintain the dignity of his position without the income to support it. Medical expenses in his senior years added another crushing layer of financial pressure. As we get older, healthcare costs skyrocket. Medicare doesn't cover everything, and supplemental insurance is expensive. Medications, doctor visits, potential hospitalizations, all of this costs money that many retired pastors simply don't have. What made Bishop Bryant's situation even more significant is that it exposed a crisis affecting hundreds of black church leaders. Pastors and bishops who had given their entire lives to building churches and ministries discovered too late that they hadn't built adequate financial security for themselves. They had spent decades making sure the church was taken care of financially, but neglected their own retirement planning. The black church community was shocked when news of Bishop Bryant's financial struggles became known. Here was a man who had reached the absolute pinnacle of church leadership, who had the respect of everyone, who had lived honorably and served faithfully. And yet he was struggling financially in his old age. What do you think about these stories? Were you surprised by any of them? Do you think some of these pastors deserved what happened? Or do you feel sympathy for their situations? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss our content.
Developing story that we're following now, Bishop T.D. Jakes, the leader of Dallas megachurch, the Potter's House, announced today that he will be stepping down.
Not every preacher practices what they preach. Behind some pulpits, darkness hides in plain sight, masked by charisma, power, and the promise of salvation. From assaults to theft, here are 15 of the most evil black pastors whose actions shocked their congregations and stained their legacies. 1. Reverend James Cleveland.
Let me ask you this, did Reverend James Cleveland really die from AIDS?
Whoa.
James Cleveland earned the nickname King of Gospel for good reason. He created the Gospel Music Workshop of America, which became a huge deal in gospel music circles. This wasn't just some small church program either. It grew into a massive organization that brought together gospel singers from all over the country. Cleveland had this amazing ability to spot talent and help people develop their musical gifts. His workshops became the place where gospel singers went to learn their craft and network with other musicians. But behind all that success, Cleveland kept his personal life pretty quiet. Maybe too quiet. People in the gospel world whispered about him sometimes, but nobody really knew what was going on behind closed doors. Cleveland was all business when it came to his public image, focusing on music and ministry rather than talking about his private affairs. After Cleveland died in 1991, things got messy real quick. Christopher Harris, who Cleveland had taken in as a foster son, came forward with some serious accusations. Harris claimed that Cleveland had sexually abused him over several years and even passed along HIV. The whole thing became a legal nightmare that dragged Cleveland's name through the mud. Harris said Cleveland used his position of authority and trust to manipulate him, taking advantage of a vulnerable young man who looked up to him. The lawsuit brought up all sorts of uncomfortable questions about Cleveland's personal life. People started talking about his sexuality in ways they never had before. Some folks defended him fiercely, saying the accusations were lies meant to destroy a good man's reputation. Others weren't so sure, especially when more details came out during the legal proceedings. Cleveland's family and supporters fought back hard, but the damage was done. The case got settled out of court for an amount nobody talks about publicly. That settlement meant we never got to hear all the evidence, so people were left to make up their own minds about what really happened. The Gospel Music Workshop of America kept going, but Cleveland's name was forever linked to the scandal. 2. Reverend Clarence LaVaughn. Franklin.
If you anticipate failure, believe me, you're going to fail.
Reverend Franklin was Aretha Franklin's dad, and he was pretty famous in his own right. He led Detroit's New Bethel Baptist Church and got involved in civil rights work alongside folks like Martin Luther King Jr. Franklin was known for his powerful preaching style and his ability to draw huge crowds to his church. He recorded dozens of sermons that sold well across the country, making him one of the most recognizable voices in Black Christianity. But Franklin had some serious issues when it came to women. People talked about his affairs all the time, and not quietly either. Franklin seemed to think his position as a pastor gave him special privileges when it came to relationships. Church members would whisper about different women coming and going from his life, but nobody felt comfortable challenging him directly. The worst rumor involved a 12-year-old girl from his church. Supposedly, he got her pregnant, and she had his baby. That's the kind of story that makes your stomach turn, whether it's true or not. The girl in question never came forward publicly, but the rumors persisted for years. Some people said Franklin paid money to keep the story quiet, while others claimed it was all made up by his enemies. Later on, folks started saying Franklin threw wild parties at his Detroit mansion. These weren't church socials either. People described them as pretty raunchy affairs with drinking, drugs, and all sorts of inappropriate behavior. Some even claimed Aretha got hurt at one of these parties when she was just a kid, though she never talked about it publicly. The parties apparently happened regularly, and Franklin didn't seem to care who knew about them. Franklin also had problems with the government about not paying his taxes. The IRS came after him for owing thousands of dollars in back taxes over several years. He got arrested on drug charges too, though those charges got dropped later. Some people thought the drug arrest was connected to those wild parties at his house, but nothing was ever proven in court. Franklin's story ended badly. In June 1979, someone shot him twice at his Detroit home during what looked like a robbery attempt. The attackers never got caught, and some people wondered if Franklin had made enemies who wanted him dead. Maybe it was just a random crime, or maybe someone had a grudge against him for his behavior over the years. Franklin spent the next 5 years in a coma before dying on July 27, 1984. He was 69 years old. Aretha never talked much about her father's scandals, choosing to focus on his positive contributions to civil rights and gospel music instead. 3. Bishop Eddie Long.
Because some days I wake up like a conqueror, and some days I wake up fearless, and then some days.
Eddie Long knew how to grow a church, and he proved it big time with New Birth Missionary Baptist Church in Georgia. When he took over, the place had maybe 300 members on a good Sunday. Under his leadership, that number exploded to over 25,000 people. The church complex grew too, becoming this massive campus with multiple buildings, a bookstore, a restaurant, and even its own television studio. Long was doing something right when it came to attracting people to church. Long preached what's called the prosperity gospel, telling people that God wanted them to be wealthy and successful. He dressed the part too, always wearing expensive suits and driving luxury cars. His personal mansion was worth millions, and he lived like a celebrity rather than a traditional pastor. Some people loved this message because it gave them hope for a better life. Others thought it was pretty far from what Jesus actually taught. But in 2010, Long's world came crashing down when 4 young men came forward with identical stories. They claimed Long used his position to pressure them into sexual relationships over several years. According to their lawsuits, Long would single out young men in his congregation, shower them with attention and gifts, and then gradually manipulate them into inappropriate relationships. The accusers said Long gave them expensive jewelry, cars, and cash. He took them on fancy trips to other cities and countries, always making sure they stayed in nice hotels and ate at expensive restaurants. The church apparently paid for all of this, which meant congregation members were unknowingly funding Long's alleged grooming activities. The young men described feeling trapped because Long had so much power in their community. Long's congregation was not having it when these stories came out. Thousands of members left the church within months, and they weren't quiet about why they were leaving. People who had donated money and time to build up New Birth felt betrayed and angry. Less people meant less money coming in, and Long started panicking as his empire began to crumble. Long got up in front of his remaining congregation and denied everything passionately. He said he had spent his whole life helping people and couldn't believe anyone would make up such horrible lies about him. He claimed the accusations were attacks from Satan designed to destroy his ministry. Some of his loyal supporters believed him and stayed, but many others had heard enough. Despite all his public denials, Long settled those lawsuits in 2011. Nobody knows exactly how much money changed hands, but it was reportedly several $1 million divided among the 4 accusers. The settlement agreements included confidentiality clauses, so we never got to hear more details about what allegedly happened. 4. Pastor Keon Henderson.
Hush, hush. Silence in the name of Jesus.
Sometimes it's the little things that cause big problems in the social media age. In 2024, a video of Pastor Keon Henderson went viral, and not in a good way. During a church service at the Lighthouse Church, Henderson was preaching when a woman in the congregation started crying loudly. Instead of showing compassion or understanding, Henderson snapped his fingers at her and told her to hush in front of everyone. The whole thing was caught on camera and posted online within hours. The video spread like wildfire across social media platforms, with people sharing it and adding their own commentary. Some folks were absolutely outraged by Henderson's behavior, saying it was incredibly insensitive to treat a distressed church member that way. Others defended him, arguing that he was just trying to maintain order during the service. Henderson leads the Lighthouse Church in Houston, which has grown into a pretty successful ministry. He's married to reality TV star Shawnee O'Neal, which gives him additional visibility beyond just church circles. The couple often appears together at public events and on social media, presenting themselves as a power couple in the Christian community. The viral video caused major problems for Henderson's reputation. People started digging into his background and questioning his pastoral approach. Some former church members came forward to share their own stories about Henderson's leadership style, though none were as dramatic as the finger-snapping incident. Henderson realized pretty quickly that he had messed up big time. The negative attention was growing by the day, and even people who didn't usually pay attention to church drama were talking about the video. He made a public apology to the woman during a later service, saying he had no idea his actions would hurt her so much. He told his whole congregation he was sorry for causing her trouble and embarrassment. The woman accepted his apology publicly, which helped calm things down somewhat. But the damage was done in terms of Henderson's broader reputation. The video became a perfect example of how modern technology can turn a small moment of poor judgment into a major scandal that follows you forever. 5. Pastor David E. Wilson.
Deliver us in the way of life, and your name shall be praised forever and ever. Amen.
Pastor David Wilson's scandal was the kind that makes you want to hide under a rock and never come out. In October 2019, a sexually explicit video started making rounds on the internet that allegedly showed Wilson engaged in intimate acts. People said the man in the video looked exactly like Wilson, who led Bible Way Ministries and World Outreach in Texas, and the resemblance was pretty convincing. Wilson had built a solid reputation in his community over many years of ministry. His church wasn't huge, but it was respected, and Wilson was known as a family man who preached traditional values. He often spoke about the importance of moral behavior and staying faithful to your spouse. That made the video scandal even more shocking to people who knew him. The video spread rapidly through social media and text messages, especially in the Houston area where Wilson's church was located. Church members were getting sent the video by friends and family members, creating an incredibly awkward situation for everyone involved. Some people were watching it out of curiosity, while others refused to look but heard about it anyway. Wilson chose to stay completely silent about the whole situation, which probably drove people even crazier. He didn't confirm it was him in the video, but he didn't deny it either. His church issued no statements, and Wilson himself avoided all media contact. Maybe he figured any response would just make things worse and draw more attention to the scandal. The internet had a field day with Wilson's silence. Memes started popping up making jokes about the situation, and people began creating their own theories about what really happened. Some folks put on their detective hats and tried to analyze the video to prove it wasn't really Wilson. They pointed to differences in body type, facial features, and other details that might indicate it was someone else entirely. Others weren't buying the mistaken identity theory and made jokes about pastors practicing what they preach, just not the right things. The whole situation became a source of entertainment for people who love church drama, while Wilson's actual congregation was left dealing with the embarrassment and uncertainty. Sixth, Pastor Jamal Bryant.
Through my own life's experiences, I think God was positioning me for this hour to lead a church.
Jamal Bryant has managed to stay relevant in the church world for years, even landing the prestigious position of taking over Eddie Long's role at New Birth Missionary Baptist Church after Long died. Bryant is young, charismatic, and knows how to work a crowd. He's also pretty savvy about social media and staying in the public eye, which has helped his career but also exposed his personal problems. Bryant's first marriage to Giselle Bryant fell apart in a very public way, and he didn't try to hide why. Bryant admitted he had been unfaithful multiple times during their marriage, and that's ultimately what killed their relationship. The divorce proceedings were messy and got covered in the media, especially since Giselle later became a star on the reality show Real Housewives of Potomac. Giselle didn't stay quiet about their problems either. She talked openly about Bryant's infidelity on her reality show and in interviews, giving details about how his cheating affected their family. She described feeling humiliated and betrayed, especially since Bryant was supposed to be a moral leader in their community. Their 3 daughters were also affected by all the public drama surrounding their parents' divorce. After the divorce, more drama followed Bryant around like a dark cloud. A woman named Latoya Shanti Odom filed a paternity suit against Bryant, claiming he was the father of her young son. Odom said she and Bryant had an affair while he was still married to Giselle, and she wanted him to take responsibility for their child both financially and personally. The paternity case became another public embarrassment for Bryant. Court documents and legal proceedings were covered by blogs and gossip websites, keeping Bryant's personal life in the headlines for all the wrong reasons. Eventually, DNA tests confirmed that Bryant was indeed the father of Odom's son, forcing him to acknowledge another child born from his extramarital affairs. Despite all the personal scandals, Bryant has kept his career going strong. He's still preaching to packed churches, writing books, and appearing on television shows. Some people can separate his personal mistakes from his ministry work, while others find it harder to take spiritual advice from someone whose own life seems so messy. Bryant has acknowledged his past mistakes and says he's learned from them, but new controversies keep popping up to challenge his credibility. 7. Pastor Creflo Dollar.
What's your name? Is that your real name? Do you have your daddy's name? When can I meet your daddy? Is your dad and mama together? How do you act when you get mad?
Creflo Dollar made his name and fortune in the prosperity gospel movement, building a ministry that tells people God wants them to be wealthy and successful. Dollar practices what he preaches when it comes to living large. He's got multiple mansions, expensive cars, and all the trappings of serious wealth. His World Changers Church International in Georgia attracts thousands of members who contribute millions of dollars annually to support Dollar's ministry and lifestyle. But Dollar really stepped in it in 2015 when he launched a campaign to raise $60 million for a new private jet. Not just any jet either. He wanted a Gulfstream G650, which is basically the Rolls-Royce of private aircraft. Dollar told his followers that he needed this specific plane to spread the gospel around the world more efficiently. He said commercial flights were too restrictive and that having his own jet would allow him to reach more people with God's message. Dollar's Church created a whole website dedicated to the jet fundraising campaign. They broke down the $60 million price tag and asked supporters to donate whatever they could toward the purchase. The campaign materials explained that the jet would be used for ministry purposes and would ultimately benefit the entire Christian community by allowing Dollar to travel more frequently to preach. The backlash was swift and brutal. People couldn't believe a pastor was asking for that kind of money for a private jet, while many of his followers struggled financially. Critics pointed out that $60 million could feed a lot of hungry people or provide housing for the homeless. The story got picked up by major news outlets, and Dollar became a national laughingstock almost overnight. Dollar quickly shut down the public campaign, probably realizing how bad it looked and how much damage it was doing to his reputation. He issued a statement saying the campaign had been misunderstood and that he wasn't personally asking anyone for money. But the damage was already done. People had seen his true priorities and they weren't impressed. But here's the kicker that really made people angry. Even after canceling the public campaign, Dollar's property holding company reportedly bought not one, but two used jets anyway, a Gulfstream G4 and a Learjet 60. So much for learning his lesson about optics. Dollar apparently found other ways to get his private aircraft without asking his congregation directly. 8. Bishop Thomas Dexter, Jakes.
Dallas megachurch pastor T.D. Jakes says he needed emergency surgery after he fell ill during his sermon last weekend.
T.D. Jakes is probably one of the most famous pastors in America and certainly one of the most successful. His Potter's House Church in Dallas draws thousands of people every Sunday, and his sermons are broadcast around the world. Jakes has written multiple best-selling books, produced movies, and built a media empire that generates millions of dollars annually. He's definitely more than just a pastor. He's a full-blown celebrity and businessman. But some people have serious questions about how Jakes lives compared to how he preaches. Critics point to his expensive lifestyle and wonder if it matches up with traditional Christian values about humility and helping the poor. Jakes owns multiple large homes, drives luxury cars, and clearly enjoys the finer things in life. His suits alone probably cost more than some people make in a month. Jakes' mansion in Dallas is reportedly worth several $million and includes all sorts of luxury amenities. He's got expensive art on the walls, high-end furniture throughout, and grounds that require a full-time staff to maintain. Some folks think that's hypocritical for someone who's supposed to be focused on spiritual matters rather than material wealth. The criticism gets stronger when people look at Jakes' congregation, which includes many working-class families who struggle financially. These are people who donate money to support the ministry while living paycheck to paycheck themselves. Seeing their pastor live in such luxury while they worry about paying rent creates some uncomfortable questions about where their donations are really going. 9. Dietrich Haddon.
I believe in if God is giving you to do something, you don't worry about people's opinions, you just go out there and do it.
Dietrich Haddon was known for his gospel music long before he became known for his messy personal life. He had a successful recording career and was respected in gospel music circles for his talent and creativity. Haddon also pastored a church and seemed to have his life together professionally, even if things were falling apart behind the scenes. His first marriage to Demita Haddon started out looking pretty solid from the outside. They seemed like a power couple in the gospel world, both involved in music and ministry. But things started going wrong, and instead of handling their problems privately, the whole situation exploded into public drama that entertained and shocked people for months. Haddon accused Demita of cheating on him with Isaac Carree, another well-known gospel singer. He didn't just keep this private either. He aired all their dirty laundry in public through interviews, social media posts, and even during church services. Haddon claimed Carree had broken up his home and destroyed his marriage, painting himself as the innocent victim of betrayal. But here's where Haddon's story gets really messy and hypocritical. While he was running around accusing his wife and Isaac Curry of cheating, he was doing exactly the same thing himself. Haddon had been having an affair with a woman named Dominique, and she got pregnant with his child while he was still married to Demita. Talk about throwing stones in a glass house. When the truth about Haddon's own affair came out, it completely changed how people saw the situation. Suddenly, he wasn't the innocent victim anymore. He was just another cheating husband trying to make his wife look bad while hiding his own guilt. The fact that he had gotten another woman pregnant while married made everything even worse. Haddon eventually married Dominique, the woman he had been cheating with, but the damage to his reputation was already done. He tried to apologize for the pain he'd caused and take responsibility for his actions, but many people had already made up their minds about his character. His music career survived the scandal, but his credibility as a spiritual leader took a serious hit that he's still trying to recover from years later. 10. Henry Lyons.
Gone are the days where I need all that. He said, God, burn off some stuff.
Henry Lyons had the nickname Deacon because he seemed so devoted to church life and Christian values. People who knew him described a man who spent all his free time at church talking to members about their problems and raising money for various projects and improvements. He had a reputation for being completely trustworthy with finances and deeply committed to serving his community through religious work. When Lyons became president of the National Baptist Convention USA in 1994, nobody was surprised by the choice. The NBC is absolutely huge. We're talking about 10 million members and the largest black Christian denomination in America. Being president of an organization that size comes with tremendous responsibility and influence over millions of people's spiritual lives. Lyons seemed perfect for the job based on his background and reputation. He had served faithfully in local church leadership for years and had proven himself capable of managing complex projects and budgets. The NBC presidency was seen as the natural next step for someone with his skills and dedication to Christian service. But in 1998, just 4 years after taking over the NBC, federal prosecutors dropped a bombshell that shocked the entire Christian community. They indicted Lyons on multiple serious charges, including fraud, extortion, money laundering, conspiracy, and tax evasion. Basically, they accused him of systematically stealing from the very organization he was supposed to protect and serve. The indictment revealed an elaborate scheme where Lyons allegedly used his position to divert NBC funds into personal accounts and fake companies he controlled. Prosecutors claimed he had stolen more than $4 million over several years, using the money to buy luxury items, take expensive vacations, and maintain a lifestyle far beyond what his legitimate salary could support. Even more shocking were allegations that Lyons had been involved with multiple women despite being married, and that he had used NBC money to support these relationships. One woman, Bernice Edwards, was reportedly given access to NBC credit cards and bank accounts, allowing her to spend church money on personal expenses while having an affair with Lyons. Lyons tried to fight back against the charges, hiring expensive lawyers and claiming the whole thing was racially motivated persecution. He suggested that white prosecutors were targeting him because they couldn't stand to see a successful black religious leader. Lyons pleaded not guilty to all charges and probably hoped his reputation in the community would help him beat the case. But the evidence against Lyons was overwhelming. Bank records, credit card statements, and financial documents clearly showed money flowing from NBC accounts into Lyons' personal use. Witnesses testified about his lavish spending and inappropriate relationships, painting a picture of someone who had completely betrayed the trust placed in him. In 1999, a federal court sentenced Lyons to 5.5 years in prison for his crimes. The man who had spent all his time at church ended up spending the next several years behind bars instead. The NBC had to deal with the massive embarrassment of having their president revealed as a common criminal who had stolen millions from their organization. 11th, Pastor Carlton Pearson.
Fourth generation classical Pentecostal preacher, just like I was raised, same denomination. Church of God in Christ.
Carlton Pearson used to be one of the most respected preachers in America. He was the founder of Higher Dimensions Evangelistic Center in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and had thousands of loyal followers. Everything seemed perfect until one sermon flipped his whole world upside down. In that message, Pearson boldly declared that nobody, not even non-Christians, was going to hell. He said God's love was too great to condemn people eternally. To some, it sounded beautiful and compassionate. But to church leaders and his fellow pastors, it was nothing short of heresy. By 2004, the Joint College of African American Pentecostal Bishops officially labeled him a heretic. That's when his ministry began to collapse. His church members scattered, his influence faded, and eventually he had to step down. The fall was so dramatic that Netflix even made a movie about him called Come Sunday. It shows his struggles, his defiance, and the cost of standing against tradition. Pearson's critics said he brought his own version of hell on himself. But in truth, he also forced people to talk about one of the most uncomfortable topics in Christianity. 12th, Pastor John Gray.
So now I'm trying to be a husband and a father and a leader, and I didn't see any of those up close. So how can you be what you've never seen?
If charisma was a spiritual gift, John Gray had it in spades. He led Relentless Church in South Carolina and even popped up on television, quickly becoming a familiar face. But in 2018, that shining image started to crack. Rumors spread that Gray was having affairs, and instead of denying it, he got up in front of his entire church during a live service and admitted to emotional unfaithfulness. He asked his congregation and his wife for forgiveness. To make things even more dramatic, he then surprised his wife with a $200,000 Lamborghini. The video of the gift went viral, but instead of winning him sympathy, it only brought more criticism. People accused him of trying to buy his wife's forgiveness and even questioned whether he used church money to pay for the car. Gray insisted it was his own money, but the damage was done. While he still pastors, many people look at him differently. If Pearson's downfall started with words, Gray's drama began with actions. 13. Bishop Daniel Obenem.
Kenneth Japan has defended his recent attacks on founder of International Gospel Church, Bishop Daniel Obenem.
Now, if you thought scandals in the pulpit couldn't get wilder, meet Bishop Daniel Obenem of Ghana's International God's Way Church. In 2016, he turned discipline into a public spectacle. During a live church service, Obenem dragged out two teenagers, accused them of having premarital relations that led to pregnancy, and then flogged them in front of the whole congregation. To make matters worse, the beating was broadcast on television for the entire nation to see. Outrage followed immediately. The Minister of Gender, Children, and Social Protection stepped in and had him arrested. But Obenem's loyal supporters weren't having it. They swarmed the police station demanding his release and defending him like their lives depended on it. The scandal revealed just how extreme the loyalty of some church members could be. Obenem had already been known for his dramatic antics, but this time he had crossed a line the world couldn't ignore. 14. Pastor Lamore Whitehead.
Among the allegations against Lamore Whitehead, that he scammed a parishioner out of $90,000.
Pastor Lamore Whitehead of Brooklyn's Leaders of Tomorrow. International Churches wasn't known for being modest. His wardrobe looked more like a rapper's than a preacher's. Designer suits, flashy jewelry, and watches worth millions. But in July 2022, his flashy lifestyle turned into front-page news when masked gunmen stormed his church mid-service and stole over $1 million jewelry from him and his wife. The robbery was live-streamed and quickly went viral. Instead of sympathy, the public mostly mocked him. People asked why a pastor was draped in ice while preaching about God. Things only got worse in June 2024 when he was convicted of fraud for stealing $90,000 from a follower and spending it on luxury items. He was sentenced to 9 years in prison. From calling himself the Bishop of the Hood to ending up behind bars, Whitehead's story is a cautionary tale of style over substance. 15. Pastor Tony Smith.
God was talking to his people. The very book we read show you that the book is not there about. He was talking to his people.
If there's one pastor who doesn't believe in filters, it's Tony Smith of Atlanta-based Tony Smith Ministries. His sermons are blunt, raw, and often offensive. He has openly bashed the LGBTQ+ community, mocked other denominations, and even referred to women as Jezebels during one infamous sermon that went viral on YouTube. Supporters defend him, saying he's simply telling it like it is. But critics argue that his words fuel hate and division. His comments have sparked outrage, online backlash, and even protests outside his church. Some church leaders have publicly condemned him, but Smith refuses to back down. To him, God's truth doesn't need to be softened for anyone. He believes the Bible isn't supposed to be politically correct, and he has built his whole reputation on being unapologetic. Whether people see him as bold or just plain offensive, one thing is clear. He thrives on controversy and shows no signs of slowing down.
The old man who's really responsible for our career today, he's gone to live with Jesus. He was sitting there and he was listening. And he told me that night, he said, from now on, you're going to be the lead singer.
These gospel legends changed the world with their voices, but died, broke, forgotten, and ignored. From the godmother of rock and roll to gospel giants who inspired Elvis and Sam Cooke, they gave everything to the church and got almost nothing back. Here are 20 gospel icons whose voices shook the heavens, but whose final days were marked by poverty, pain, and powerful stories you've probably never heard. 1. Sister Rosetta Tharpe.
Don't you know now this train is a clean train, everybody riding in.
Sister Rosetta Tharpe was one of the most important figures in music history, but a lot of people don't even know her name. She was a gospel singer, guitarist, and songwriter who blended gospel music with electric guitar, basically helping invent rock and roll before Elvis, Chuck Berry, or Little Richard ever made a sound. Back in the 1930s and 1940s, Rosetta was a huge deal. She could sing like nobody else and played the guitar in a way that made people go wild. Her energy on stage, her bold voice, and her style inspired not only gospel fans, but also future rock icons like Elvis Presley, Johnny Cash, and Jerry Lee Lewis. Even Little Richard said she was one of his first influences. But even though she was a star in her time, things didn't stay that way forever. As she got older, her fame started to fade. Gospel music changed, and newer artists took the spotlight. Meanwhile, Rosetta was still performing in smaller churches and clubs, sometimes barely making enough to survive. She had health problems too. She had diabetes, and eventually it got so bad that doctors had to amputate one of her legs. Rosetta spent her last days in a simple hotel room in Philadelphia, living with very little money. She didn't have the kind of retirement or support that someone with her level of talent and history deserved. In 1973, she passed away after suffering a stroke. She was only 58 years old. Second Reverend James Cleveland. James Cleveland was known as the king of gospel music, and for good reason. He had a deep, powerful voice that could move crowds, and he helped shape gospel music into what it is today. He worked with legends like Aretha Franklin and Mahalia Jackson, and even won Grammy Awards. He was a big deal in both the church world and the music world. Cleveland didn't just sing, he also directed choirs, wrote songs, and mentored a ton of young gospel singers. His choir, the Southern California Community Choir, became famous for their energy and beautiful harmonies. People say James Cleveland didn't just perform gospel music, he lived it. But even with all that talent and success, things weren't so perfect behind the scenes. When he passed away in 1991, it came as a shock not just because of his death, but because of what came next. Legal fights broke out over his estate. It turned out that his money and property weren't well organized. Some of the people who thought they'd be taken care of were left with nothing, and others had to go to court just to get clarity. Cleveland also struggled with health issues like respiratory problems, and he passed away at just 59 years old. Though he had a big influence in gospel music, he didn't leave behind a solid financial legacy. A lot of people expected that someone so famous would have had everything in order, but sadly, that wasn't the case. 3. Willie Mae Ford Smith. Willie Mae Ford Smith was a gospel music legend, but she didn't live like one. She wasn't rich. She didn't seek the spotlight. She didn't even want to be famous. What she wanted was to serve God, and she did it through her powerful singing and teaching. Born in Mississippi in 1904, Willie Mae moved to St. Louis and started singing in church. She quickly gained a reputation for her emotional, spirit-filled voice. Unlike many other performers, she didn't perform for applause. She sang to touch people's hearts and bring them closer to God. She became a leading figure in gospel music, not by chasing fame, but by teaching and mentoring others. Some of the biggest names in gospel looked up to her. She also helped organize women in the church when women didn't have many leadership roles. Through the National Convention of Gospel Choirs and Choruses, she trained other singers and helped create the modern gospel sound. But even though she shaped the entire genre, she didn't make much money from it. Willie Mae lived modestly in a small home in St. Louis. She gave more than she received and never sought riches. She didn't record a ton of albums or do fancy tours. Her focus was always ministry. When she died in 1994 at the age of 90, it wasn't front-page news. Most people outside of the gospel world had no idea who she was. But the people who knew her? They knew they had lost a true giant. 4th Reverend Charles Nix, Jr. Reverend Charles Nix, Jr. was one of those people who could take a church service to the next level just by touching the organ keys. He was famous in gospel circles for his powerful organ playing, rich voice, and incredible ability to direct choirs. If you've ever heard a gospel choir go all out with energy and harmony, you've probably heard something inspired by Reverend Nix. He was the pastor of St. James Missionary Baptist Church in Detroit, and under his leadership, the church became a musical powerhouse. His choir, the St. James Adult Choir, put out some of the most loved gospel recordings of the 1980s. Songs like No Cross, No Crown, and I Really Love the Lord still hit people in the heart today. His style was dramatic but soulful. He could make you cry, shout, and sing all in the same song. But behind all the powerful music and church success, Reverend Nix was quietly battling cancer. It was a tough fight, and even though he kept working and performing, his health was getting worse. In 1988, he passed away at just 47 years old. It shocked the gospel world. No one expected someone so young, so talented, and so beloved to be gone so soon. 5. Arizona Drains. Arizona Drains was a total game changer in gospel music. She was one of the first gospel pianists to be recorded, and honestly, her style was way ahead of her time. She mixed spirituals with a wild, fast piano style that got people moving in their seats. Some even say she helped shape the sound of rock and roll years before it was a thing. Born in Texas in the 1890s, Arizona was blind from birth, but that didn't stop her from becoming a musical force. In the 1920s, she recorded with OK Records and shocked people with how modern and powerful her music sounded. She played piano like no one else in gospel at the time, fast, loud, and full of energy. She also shouted when she sang, which inspired a whole new wave of gospel singers to get louder and more emotional. But sadly, as time went on, Arizona Drains faded into the background. She didn't keep recording like others did, and she didn't get the recognition she deserved. She didn't chase fame, and maybe because she was a blind black woman in the early 1900s, the world didn't give her the credit she had earned. By the time she passed away in 1963, she was living in poverty. Her name had been mostly forgotten. She didn't have big royalties, no fancy house, and no headlines announcing her death. Just a quiet ending for someone who helped build the very foundation of modern gospel. 6. Professor Thomas A. Dorsey. Professor Thomas A. Dorsey is often called the father of gospel music. And honestly, it's hard to argue with that. He wrote some of the most powerful gospel songs ever, including Take My Hand, Precious Lord, which was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s favorite song. That one song alone has been sung at thousands of funerals and church services across the world. But Dorsey's journey wasn't easy. He actually started out in blues music under the name Georgia Tom. He played with legends like Ma Rainey and made decent money doing it. But after a personal tragedy, his wife and newborn baby died during childbirth, he turned fully to gospel music as a way to heal. That's when he wrote Precious Lord, pouring all his pain into the lyrics. Even though he created an entire genre of music, Dorsey struggled financially for most of his life. Churches at that time didn't pay much, and gospel artists didn't make the kind of money pop stars did. He traveled around trying to promote gospel, teaching choirs and writing music, but it was always a hustle. He didn't get rich off royalties, and many people even sang his songs without giving him credit. It wasn't until much later in life that he finally got some recognition. In his old age, he was honored with awards and featured in documentaries, but he had already lived through years of poverty and struggle. Dorsey lived to be 93, but most of those years were spent working hard and not getting paid what he was worth. 7. Mahalia Jackson. Mahalia Jackson is one of the most legendary gospel singers of all time. Like, if you ask anyone who the Queen of Gospel is, they'll probably say her name. She had a powerful voice that gave people chills, and she used it not only to praise God, but also to stand up for civil rights. She even sang at Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s funeral. In her prime, Mahalia was a superstar. She sold millions of records, toured around the world, and even had her own TV show. She was one of the first gospel singers to perform at Carnegie Hall. And the best part? She never switched over to pop or R&B just to make more money. She stayed true to gospel. But as amazing as her career was, her personal finances weren't always great. Later in life, Mahalia started facing serious money problems. She had trouble with the IRS and owed a lot in taxes. Some of it was due to bad financial advice. Like a lot of artists, she trusted the wrong people with her money. Even though she had once made a lot, it didn't last. On top of that, she had health problems. She struggled with heart disease and diabetes, and she had to cancel shows because of it. Medical bills and stress didn't make things any easier. When she passed away in 1972 at the age of 60, she was still loved by millions, but her bank account told a different story. She had financial troubles that made her final years difficult. It's hard to believe that someone so famous with such a big impact didn't have enough money to live comfortably in the end. Yettam Aandu Puthakam. Clay Evans. Reverend Clay Evans was one of the most respected names in gospel music and ministry. If you ever heard him preach or sing, you'd know he had a presence. He wasn't just a church leader. He was a civil rights supporter, a gospel singer, and the founder of Fellowship Missionary Baptist Church in Chicago. He helped build the church from the ground up, turning it into one of the most influential black churches in America. His sermons were fiery and full of passion, and his music was deep and moving. He released albums, led choirs, and even helped launch the careers of other gospel singers. He was all about lifting others up. But despite his success and long-lasting impact, Reverend Evans didn't die wealthy. That's because almost everything he earned went back into his church and his community. He wasn't flashy. He didn't live in a mansion or drive expensive cars. He lived simply, stayed humble, and used his platform to serve others. Over the years, he gave away more than he saved. He paid for scholarships, helped people pay their rent, and supported families who were struggling. That's just the kind of person he was. When he passed away in 2019 at the age of 94, people celebrated his life like a true legend. But financially, he didn't leave behind a fortune. And honestly, he probably wouldn't have cared. His reward was in the lives he touched, not the money in his bank. 9th Reverend Julius Cheeks. Reverend Julius Cheeks was a powerhouse. If you ever heard him sing, you'd remember it forever. He had a voice that could shake the walls, raw, loud, and full of fire. He was one of the early gospel shouters, a style that mixed preaching and singing so intensely that it felt like the Holy Spirit was jumping through the mic. In the 1950s and 1960s, Cheeks was a big name. He was the lead singer of the Sensational Nightingales and later started his own group, the Four Knights. He had a style that was totally his own, gritty, emotional, and full of passion. A lot of gospel singers tried to copy his sound, but nobody could match his power. His fiery personality sometimes caused issues too. He was known for being a bit difficult to work with, which hurt his chances of getting long-term deals or more mainstream success. He mostly stayed on the gospel circuit, where money was limited and inconsistent. By the time he died in 1981, he had very little to his name. No savings, no estate. Just memories of a legendary voice that helped shape modern gospel. He gave everything on stage, but didn't leave much behind off it. 10. Mother Willie Mae Williams. Mother Willie Mae Williams was one of those gospel singers who didn't need a microphone to be heard. Her voice carried through the church and into people's souls. She was not only a powerful singer, but also a preacher. In Pentecostal and gospel circles, especially in the South, people knew her name. They knew when she took the stage, something holy was about to happen. She wasn't chasing fame. She wasn't trying to get on TV or sell albums. Mother Willie Mae was focused on ministry, singing at revivals, preaching at tent meetings, and showing up in churches big and small. Her performances weren't about showing off. They were about moving people. When she sang, folks cried, shouted, and even ran through the aisles. That's how powerful she was. But even with all that talent and respect, she didn't get rich. In fact, she never even came close. She gave everything to the gospel world, but she didn't get much back financially. She didn't have a fancy house or big recording contracts. Most of the time, she relied on small church love offerings and support from the community. When she got older and her health started to fail, things became even tougher. Medical bills piled up, and there wasn't a strong safety net to help her. She didn't have money saved up or a steady income. Sadly, when she passed away, there wasn't a huge headline. There were no big tributes on TV. Only those who really knew gospel music felt the loss deeply. 11th, Elder Roma Wilson.
Up above my head, there's trouble in hell. There's trouble in my head.
Elder Roma Wilson had a gift. He could make a harmonica talk. Born in Mississippi in 1910, he learned to play the harmonica as a kid, and that tiny instrument became his voice. He didn't need a big choir or a fancy stage. Just give him a harmonica and a sidewalk, and he could fill the air with music that sounded like heaven. Wilson played gospel and blues, but he was most famous in street corners and small gatherings. He worked most of his life as a laborer, digging ditches, doing construction, and working whatever jobs he could find. Music was his passion, but it never paid the bills. So he just kept playing because he loved it. For decades, hardly anyone outside his local community knew who he was. Then, in the 1990s, when he was already in his 80s, a music historian rediscovered him. Suddenly, people were amazed at how talented he was. He got invited to festivals, recorded some tracks, and even traveled to Europe to perform. But by then, he had already spent nearly 70 years living in poverty. It's sad that someone with so much talent had to wait until their 80s to be noticed. Even when he started gaining some recognition, he never really became wealthy. But Elder Roma Wilson didn't complain. He said he played for God, not for money. 12. Sally Martin. Sally Martin is often called the mother of gospel music, and that's not just a cute nickname. She really helped build the genre from the ground up. Born in 1895 in Georgia, she started singing in churches and caught the attention of Thomas A. Dorsey, the father of gospel music. The two of them basically created the modern gospel sound together. Sally was more than just a singer. She was a smart businesswoman too. She started her own publishing company to sell gospel sheet music at a time when most artists, especially black women, had no say in how their music was sold. She helped bring gospel into the spotlight by touring across the country and building choirs that could blow the roof off any church. But even with all her hard work, Sally never became rich. She poured her money back into the music and into helping others. She was known for helping young artists get started, sometimes paying their travel expenses out of her own pocket. She wasn't thinking about getting rich. She was thinking about spreading gospel music and helping people. As she got older, her health declined, and financial struggles became a reality. She didn't have a huge estate or retirement plan. When she died in 1988, she left behind a massive legacy, but not much wealth. 13. Blind, Willie Johnson.
God is my strong protection. He's my bosom friend.
Blind Willie Johnson was one of the most powerful gospel blues artists to ever live. His voice sounded like it came from another world, raw, gritty, full of pain and soul. Even though he only recorded around 30 songs, his music had a huge impact on American music, influencing gospel, blues, and even rock artists decades later. Willie was born in Texas in the late 1800s and went blind as a child, either from an accident or illness. No one's exactly sure. Despite being blind and poor, he taught himself to play the guitar using a knife as a slide. That's what gave his music that haunting, crying sound. He didn't sing about partying or love. He sang about pain, faith, and the struggles of life. Songs like Dark Was the Night, Cold Was the Ground, and Nobody's Fault. But mine were deep and emotional. You didn't just listen, you felt them. Even NASA included his song, Dark Was the Night, on the golden record sent into space on the Voyager spacecraft in 1977. That's how iconic he was. But during his life, Willie never got the respect or money he deserved. He recorded for Columbia Records in the late 1920s, but like most black musicians of that time, he got paid very little and had no control over his music. He spent most of his life playing music on the streets to earn pennies. In his final years, things got really bad. His house burned down, and he ended up living in the remains of the burned-out building. He had no clean bed, no safe place to sleep. He reportedly got sick. Some say it was malaria, others say pneumonia, after sleeping on a wet mattress in that burned house. When he tried to get help, he was turned away from the hospital because he was black and poor. He died shortly after in 1945, completely broke and mostly forgotten. 14. Claude Jeter.
When I catch sight on my loved one, old acquaintance.
Claude Jeter might not be a household name today, but if you love soul or gospel music, chances are you've heard someone inspired by him. He was the lead singer of the Swan Silvertones, and his high, smooth falsetto changed gospel forever. Artists like Sam Cooke, Al Green, and even Paul Simon looked up to him. He started out singing in coal mines in West Virginia, using music to lift spirits and praise God. In the 1940s, he formed the Swan Silvertones, and they quickly became one of the most popular gospel groups of their time. Claude had this incredible ability to hit high notes that gave people chills. His voice was pure, emotional, and full of soul. Even though he could have crossed over into pop music like Sam Cooke and others did, Claude refused. He wanted to keep his music sacred and stayed true to gospel. That decision cost him financially. While his peers became rich and famous, Claude kept singing in churches and small venues, often struggling to make ends meet. He lived very simply. Most of the money he made went back into the group or into helping others. He didn't chase the spotlight, and he didn't get rich from record sales or concerts. By the time he reached his later years, he was living in financial hardship, relying on donations and small checks. Claude Jeter passed away in 2009 at the age of 94. He lived a long life, but much of it was spent in quiet struggle. It's sad that someone who gave the world so much beauty with his voice didn't get the rewards he deserved. 15. Joe Ligon.
Pick me up.
Joe Ligon was the lead singer of the Mighty Clouds of Joy, one of the biggest and most energetic gospel groups ever. When Joe hit the stage, it was electric. His voice was raspy, powerful, and full of passion. He had a unique way of making gospel feel like a concert, but still holy. Born in Alabama, Joe started singing young. In the 1950s, he joined the Mighty Clouds of Joy and helped shape their sound. They were different from traditional gospel groups. They used electric instruments, wore flashy suits, and had choreography. Some people didn't like it at first, but they brought a fresh energy that attracted a huge following. The group went on to win awards and perform worldwide. They were even the first gospel group to appear on Soul Train. Joe's voice carried the group for decades. He was the soul of the music. But despite all the fame, Joe and his group never became truly rich. Like many gospel artists, they didn't get fair royalties from their recordings. A lot of money went to record labels and managers, not to the artists themselves. Joe Ligon performed into his 70s, often touring while dealing with health issues. He kept going because he loved the music and the people, but he wasn't doing it for money because there wasn't much of it. When he passed away in 2016, fans were shocked. His voice had been a part of gospel music for over 50 years. But even with that much history, Joe died with financial struggles, just like many of his peers. 16th Reverend W. Herbert Brewster. Reverend W. Herbert Brewster was one of the most brilliant gospel songwriters of all time. He didn't just write a few songs, he wrote over 200, and many of them are still sung in churches today. If you've ever heard Mahalia Jackson sing "Move On Up a Little Higher," you've heard Brewster's work. That song alone became a gospel classic and helped launch Mahalia's career. Brewster was more than a songwriter, he was a preacher, teacher, and storyteller. Based in Memphis, he pastored at East Trigg Avenue Baptist Church for over 50 years. He used his sermons, songs, and plays to teach about hope, justice, and God's love, especially during the tough times Black Americans were facing in the 20th century. What made Brewster special was how deep and poetic his lyrics were. He didn't just write catchy church songs, he wrote stories full of meaning, pain, and power. He had a unique way of connecting faith to real life. People said listening to his songs felt like hearing a sermon with music behind it. But even with all his talent and all the lives he touched, Brewster didn't get rich from his music. A lot of his songs were sung by other artists, especially Mahalia Jackson, and became huge hits. But he wasn't making millions. Like many gospel songwriters back then, he didn't get big royalties. Some say he gave away songs for free or didn't push for credit the way others did. He lived modestly in Memphis and focused more on serving his community than chasing fame. He kept pastoring, kept writing, and kept helping young musicians grow. When he passed away in 1987, people who knew gospel music mourned him deeply, but the wider world barely noticed. 17. Lucy Smith, Collier. Lucy Smith Collier might not be a name that everyone knows, but if you listen to gospel choirs, chances are you've heard her influence. She was a pianist, organist, singer, and choir director who worked behind the scenes for decades, but never demanded the spotlight. She was born into a musical family in Chicago. Her grandmother, Elder Lucy Smith, was a well-known female pastor and ran one of the first radio-broadcasted church services. Lucy learned music at a young age and became a natural on the piano and organ. By her teens, she was already playing in church and soon became one of the most sought-after musicians in the gospel world. She was best known for working with the Roberta Martin Singers, one of the most respected gospel groups of the 1940s and 50s. Lucy's style was elegant and full of feeling. She made the piano cry, shout, and sing, all while keeping the choir perfectly in sync. But even with all her skills and contributions, Lucy never became rich or hugely famous. Like many gospel musicians of her time, she didn't get big paychecks or live in a mansion. She lived simply, stayed in the church world, and focused on the music, not the money. Later in life, she continued teaching and mentoring others. But when she passed away in 2010, there weren't massive headlines or major tributes. Just quiet respect from those who knew her worth. 18. Essie Mae Thomas. Essie Mae Thomas wasn't a gospel celebrity with hit records or big concerts, but to the people who heard her sing at revivals, tent meetings, and backwoods churches, she was unforgettable. She had one of those voices that made you stop what you were doing and listen. It wasn't about perfection, it was about power and passion. She traveled all over the southern United States, singing in small churches, rural communities, and outdoor revivals. People loved her because she was real. She wasn't flashy, and she didn't care about being on the radio. She sang for the Lord and for the people. But life was never easy for Essie Mae. She lived hand to mouth, meaning she often didn't know where her next meal or roof would come from. She didn't have big church sponsors or music companies backing her. Most of the time, she was paid in love offerings or whatever the congregation could spare. And even that wasn't always enough. Despite the hard life, she kept going. She never stopped showing up to sing, even when her clothes were worn out or her voice was tired. She gave her heart to every song, every prayer, and every service. She passed away quietly and in poverty. No big funeral, no headlines, just a few people who remembered the way her voice touched their souls. 19. Katie Bell Newben. Katie Bell Newben wasn't just Little Richard's mom. She was a gospel singer in her own right, strong, soulful, and full of faith. Before her son became one of the biggest rock and roll stars ever, Katie Bell was already making noise in churches and revivals across the South. She raised her children in Macon, Georgia, in a deeply religious and musical home. Katie Bell sang in church, performed in tent revivals, and even made a few gospel recordings. People loved her passionate voice and powerful delivery. She wasn't trying to be famous. She was just using her gift to worship and encourage others. As her son Richard shot to worldwide fame, Katie Bell stayed close to her roots. She supported him, but she didn't chase the spotlight. She kept singing in churches and holding on to her faith, even when Richard's lifestyle and career were wild and controversial. Behind the scenes, she prayed for him constantly and tried to keep the family grounded. But despite her talent and faith, Katie Bell never became wealthy. While Richard was touring the world and selling millions of records, she was still singing in small churches, often unpaid. She wasn't living in luxury. She wasn't building a brand or trying to get rich. She lived a modest life and never really got the recognition she deserved. 20th Reverend Cleophas Robinson. Reverend Cleophas Robinson was one of the most dynamic gospel preachers and singers of his time. He had a voice that could move mountains, rich, deep, and full of emotion. Not only could he preach the roof off a church, but when he sang, people got chills. He was known as the singing preacher. Born in Mississippi, Reverend Robinson started singing at a young age. He moved to St. Louis, where he started his own church and quickly became known as a spiritual leader. But what really made him stand out was how he mixed music with ministry. His church services were packed, not just because of his sermons, but because of his music. He recorded several gospel albums and even had his own TV show, the Cleophas Robinson Gospel Show, which aired for years and helped introduce gospel music to people who had never heard it before. That show became legendary. It gave a platform to many gospel artists, and it brought worship into people's living rooms. With all of that success, you'd think he'd be financially set, but that wasn't the case. Despite his fame in the gospel world, Reverend Robinson didn't make a lot of money. Like many gospel legends, most of the profits from his work went to the record labels, not him. And running a church while raising a family wasn't cheap. In his later years, Reverend Robinson had health problems and mounting medical bills. He kept working, kept preaching, and kept singing. But his body was slowing down. He passed away in 1998 after years of financial strain, despite everything he'd accomplished. Now we want to hear from you. If you could bring back one of these legends for just one more concert, who would it be? Drop your answers in the comments below and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this.